Thank you, Pastor Josh. Wow. To be here on this Sunday of all Sundays, what a unique privilege it is. Let me just say that my job going to Haiti is not at all medical. I am not medical. That's up to the doctor and the nurses that are going, but I get to pray with the patients as they come out. And I think that's what got Dr. Babak interested in this mission to start with, because he practices that in his own personal practice. He knows that medicine can only go so far, and that God is who brings us to ultimate answers in life. And that just sort of flows directly into what we want to talk about today. I find that people are chasing after meaning in life in so many ways. And some ways are good, but they only go so far. And some ways are shortcuts that end at a dead end, and then people are disillusioned and they don't know where to turn. And as we get into the book of Matthew, back into the book of Matthew today, we're going to be in chapter 9. So I invite you to turn there, and we're going to be looking at a couple of stories in chapter 9 that kind of help us reflect on this question. After pursuing all these directions in life, maybe it is medical. Some of us are pursuing medical answers, and if we only had the right, I'm one of those, I'm on the edge of that diabetes 2 thing these days, and other things that as you get older, you find these things coming along. It's like, oh, if I could only find the right medicine or the right diet, or, I've tried lots of things to shape this thing up, and they all end up in dead ends. And some of you are pursuing security through wealth. If I just had that right job, if I just had that right position. And some of you, like today is all about the Super Bowl and the greatest teams. I've heard stories about guys who pursued, maybe it's football, maybe it's basketball, baseball, whatever, and man, they're pursuing it with all, because that is going to be what makes them somebody, and then they have an injury. And you've probably heard stories too. Sometimes those injuries bring a person crashing down. Without football, who am I? Some of us, it's downright financial, as I said earlier. If only I had more of a security. But we pursue all of those things and they fall short. Because Jesus is better. He is better than all those things that we could pursue. Following Him, giving ourselves over to Him. You've heard the illustration. Get out of the driver's seat, get in the passenger seat, and let Him do the driving. I think of all kinds of characters in the Bible. There was Joseph, And he had some dreams, and that was going to make him special. And his dad gave him a special coat that his brothers didn't have. And where did that get him? Got him thrown in a well, sold into slavery, was in prison, falsely accused, all kinds of rough things. David had no big dreams. He just was a young shepherd out in the field enjoying God. Had some scary times, had to fight off a bear, had to fight off a lion and other animals, and he was all alone. He had no idea what God was going to do with him. There was Daniel. Daniel was a teenager, like some of you young folks here, and Nebuchadnezzar comes through, wipes out Israel, and takes Daniel and all his friends captive. We find Daniel gets taken to a place that he's never been before, doesn't know anybody. The culture and everything is totally different. He never does, the rest of his life, return home. How does that work? I have discovered through the many years that God's given me the privilege that He has ways that are different than what I would choose. He has answers that aren't logical to me. Turn the other cheek. You want to be first, get at the end of the line. Things that just don't make sense. And we're going to take a look at a couple examples today as whatever you're pursuing Jesus is better. But we get into chapter 9 and starting at verse 9, and when you read the story of this, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm going to read it, and it sounds very simple, but then we're going to take a look at it a little bit further. Follow me in Matthew 9, verse 9. As Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. And as Jesus reclined at table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. Why Matthew? Of all people that Jesus could have called, why Matthew? When you take a real look at Matthew, you find that he was Jewish. He was raised in all the things that were part of the culture and the time and all the rest of that, but he chose to be a tax collector. I kind of am guessing that Matthew, whatever happened to him as a child, whether it was being deprived or whether it was rebelling against the traditions or being tempted by a better way, he decided the get-rich-quick theme was to be a tax collector, because tax collectors made out pretty well. And so Matthew became a tax collector. The problem is, what happened? Tax collectors were hated by everybody else around them. Why? Well, and probably including Matthew. We don't like to think this way. We like to think that Matthew was an honest tax collector. He was a kind tax collector, but probably not. He was like the rest of them, and he took more for himself than was proper to do. Caesar didn't care what a tax collector collected as long as he got his part of it. And Matthew was chasing after things. And I don't know. I mean, the story says that Jesus comes along and looks at Matthew and says, "Follow me, Matthew." And Matthew drops everything and just follows him like some magic spell, you know. I don't think that's really how it was. I would not be surprised that Matthew had seen Jesus a few times, had maybe heard some of his preaching. This is after the Sermon on the Mount. Maybe Matthew was even there, or certainly heard the scuttlebutt around town about this amazing teacher and the things that he was all about. And maybe in the process of trying to pursue his wealth, he was feeling the dark side of that. He was feeling the rejection by everybody in his culture. We don't know whether he was married or not. Maybe he was single and didn't have a wife because Jewish women weren't going to warm up to somebody like that. I don't know. We don't know some of the details. There's a whole lot that's not in the text that we have to kind of think about. But whatever it was, Matthew was at a place in his life where he had the chance to rethink who he was and what he was all about. And after hearing from Jesus, and maybe not even knowing exactly what this means, follow Jesus, Matthew decided, okay, I need to take that step. I need to take that chance. I need to make a change. Instead of pursuing my agenda, I need to pursue his. And so he dropped what he was doing. He quit his job to follow Jesus. That was a pretty big turnaround. Again, we don't read between the lines and understand everything that was going on, but this turnaround was obviously genuine and obviously real. And whether he only understood a little bit or truth just hit him in the face and he saw it all, it says that when Jesus went to his house, Matthew brought all of his friends, fellow tax collectors and other sinners to the house. Now, was that just Matthew's habit, or was Matthew saying, guys, something happened to me. There's been a huge change. You have to come and see. I hope it was the latter. But either way, Jesus and the other disciples got to go to his house. And Jesus had the opportunity to share his heart with other people. That's the first illustration that I wanted to share with you today, is whatever you're pursuing, it could be a very scary thing to change your job, change where you live, change your situation in life. But no question, Jesus, following Jesus, is better than whatever you were chasing. But as often happens, while they're at the house and while Jesus is sharing the good news with Matthew's friends, it goes on to say in verse 11, and the Pharisees saw this. Our buddies, the Pharisees. They saw this and they said to his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? Why did Jesus go to Matthew's house and sit amongst tax collectors and sinners. You know, I was thinking about this. I was thinking about the reality that if Jesus were here today, I think there is a good chance that he would go visit a local bar and hang out there on a Friday night or a Saturday night. Oh, what? No, there's no way. Ooh, we're not allowed to do that kind of thing. Doesn't Corinthians, Paul said to the Corinthians, bad company corrupts your morals. And Psalm 1 says, the blessed man doesn't hang with sinners. You know, I absolutely believe Jesus would go to the local bar, probably get a birch beer, and he wouldn't be going to douse his miseries or to try to feel higher or need to hang out with some friends. He would go there because he knew that hurting people go there. People that are looking to fix what ails them with a little bit of liquid remedy that makes them feel better. People who think they're going to find friends and not be alone by going there. And he would engage them in conversations. He would make them feel like they were a real person. And he would help rescue them from where they were actually heading. Following Jesus is better. And when we follow Jesus, we may find ourselves in those opportunities. I am excited to go to Haiti this week and sit down with people who, the richest Haitian is probably poorer than the poorest person in this room. And medically, when 3 strands come to town, is the only opportunity some people have to have their body looked at and their life helped in a physical way. And yeah, we're taking a chance. There's been a lot of unrest. I've been privileged to go several times, and I've come home good every time, but I know my son, the last time he went, he came home with Montezuma's Revenge, and it was rough for another week. So pray that we come home healthy ourselves as a result. But it is so worth doing things Jesus' way, not our way. Jesus said to the Pharisees in verse 12, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." And this idea sort of plays into the last illustration that we see in this section. Jesus was telling the Pharisees, it's not your religiosity, it's not coming to church on Sundays, it's not putting your dime in the offering plate. God doesn't need all of that. Recently, this is not a statement about politics, but recently I saw President Trump interviewed, and he was talking about, I think it was in relation to the prayer breakfast, And he was like pretty sure he was going to make it because he's done a lot for God. He's really worked hard for God. And that's got to count for something. Good or bad or otherwise, that misses the whole reality. It's not what we do for God. Peter himself, when Jesus went to wash his feet, Peter's like, "Oh no, you're not doing something for me." Jesus said, "Peter, if you don't let me do this, you have no part with me." And some of us could be sitting there thinking, what do I have to do to impress God? Have I done enough? And that is wrong thinking. That is not Jesus thinking. Jesus says, "Let me serve you." I was going to put it in another spot, but I'm going to put it in the sermon here. Pastor Josh, last week as he was preaching about forgiveness, and one of the things he talked about was the need for forgiving ourselves. And I'm sure we can all relate to that struggle of, sure, God has forgiven me, and I am so thankful for that, but I can't forgive myself. Can I tell you something? If you have the attitude that you can't forgive yourself, you're slapping Jesus in the face. Think about it. He gave his life in a horrible way to take your sin away from you and nail it to the cross. And he says, "I forgive you. I want you to live free. I want you to live full. I want you to enjoy life without the guilt and the baggage of the sin that has infested you, because I have taken your punishment away." And if we don't forgive ourselves, we're slapping him in the face and saying, "That's not good enough." Forgive yourself. It is a gift back to him. Let me try it another way. Did you ever offer something to somebody, and it maybe was a sacrifice on your part, but you knew it would really help them, but they refused your gift? Doesn't that hurt? Well, Jesus gave us the greatest gift. And we are better off when we follow Jesus and accept his way. The last illustration, when the disciples of John came to him in verse 14, saying, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" Why didn't Jesus' disciples fast? You know, talking about traditions, coming to church on Sunday mornings and getting together, that's a biblical mandate. Don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together. So Sunday morning church is important, right? And set aside the first of your fruits and give them to the Father. And so offering is important, isn't it? And all the things that we do as Christians are important, aren't they? Fasting was John's disciples themselves fasted. John probably trained them. They probably fasted like one day every week, more so than the general public. And they come and say, "But Jesus' disciples don't even fast. We don't get it. I love growing in my faith and learning the answers behind the rules. Why do we have a speed limit for traveling? If you go 10 miles over the speed limit, is the world going to fall apart? What is the reason behind those rules? I've driven through some neighborhoods that have the signs, you've seen them close to the road, that say, drive like your children live in this neighborhood. You know, if I'm living there, I don't want cars speeding down my road and possibly picking off one of my children. So it's not the speed limit, it's what it stands for. Church attendance isn't the point. It's why come, why be here. Maybe you're going to rub shoulders with somebody and your life experience is going to make a difference for them. Maybe you're singing a song. You know what's cool? You know what's cool about preaching? I know what I'm going to say before I come to church Sunday morning, most times. And I came this morning, I was listening to the worship team in their practice, and every song hit me so deep because I knew what I was going to be preaching about. And the songs are amazing. And wait till we get to the last song. And it's not checking off the box. It's what's behind and why. Why did Jesus' disciples not fast? Well, Jesus, catch this. The Pharisees were all over Jesus' case. We're looking for the Messiah. We need God's salvation. God is going to rescue us. And Jesus is standing right there. You, get out of the way. We're looking for the Messiah. Sometimes we come to worship for the wrong reasons. Sometimes we put our offering in the plate for the wrong reasons. Sometimes we obey God for the wrong reasons. And we miss the point. And Jesus is saying, well, let's read what he said. Can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast. So if you're wondering, well, if the disciples of Jesus don't fast, then maybe we shouldn't fast. Well, Jesus came and he's gone for a while. So there are still times that you and I need to fast. Not because it's a good ritual, although it's good for us not to eat occasionally for a whole day, but because of what fasting does to draw us into focusing on God. No one puts a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch tears away from the garment, and a worse tear is made. Neither is new wine put into old wineskins. If it is, the skins burst, and the wine is spilled, and the skins are destroyed. But new wine is put into fresh wineskins, and so both are preserved. What do these last two concepts mean? We don't do this anymore. Back in the old days when I was a kid, got a hole in your sock, Mom sewed the sock. And then you're walking around and you're feeling this lump under your heel where the stitches were, and you're like, wow. Jeans, aren't they awesome? There's a whole lot of holy jeans out there that need patches. But if you get new jean material to sew into those patches, guess what's going to happen? The next time it goes through the dryer and shrinkage happens to the new material that you sewed in, it's just going to make those holes even bigger. So you got to understand the meaning behind the rules. And Jesus was teaching. Now, the whole wineskin, I mean, that's way out of our league, right? What are you talking about? They would take leather and form it and sew it together, and then they would put the wine in that pouch. And as wine fermented, what would it do? It would expand. It would stretch the leather. So the local guy that said, I'm going to save a few bucks, use my old wineskin. Just fill that up. I'll take it for a cheaper price. And after a day or two, all of a sudden, the wine causes that old wineskin. It's stretched all that it could stretch, and boom, it cracks, and all the wine ends up on the ground. Some people are chasing religiosity and wondering why it doesn't work. It's not religion. It's Jesus that is better. It's pursuing Jesus. And last quick story, my own personal story. And for some of us, we've already followed Jesus. We've already given him our life. And we're excited that we're going to heaven when all this misery is over with. But I remember when he chose to take my Joyce home. And some of you have heard this story before. I honestly didn't think that he could take care of me. My solution was to sit down on the couch and become a hermit. Why in the world would I stand up on a Sunday and preach? I am empty. I have nothing to give anybody else. And I sat there. And it's as if he looked at me one day and said, so do you believe everything that you've preached for the last 30 years? Trust me. That was hard. It was easy to trust him to save me, but to follow him and know that he would take care of me without my girl, I honestly did not believe. But what choice did I have? So one day at a time, I said, okay, I'll do it your way, not my way. I got up and preached for several months, feeling completely numb, but it was the right thing to do. I continued caring about people even though I didn't feel it at all, because it was the right thing to do. And now, 13 years later, and you've heard me say it, I am the most blessed man in the world, and God has been 100% faithful to meeting everything that I could have ever asked, and even more. Because following Jesus is better than doing it your way. Would you bow your heads, close your eyes, and wrap yourself up with God? And ask yourself, what am I holding on to? What am I not trusting you with? What am I saying, my way is better than your way? I invite you in this quiet moment, just between you and God, to give that to him. To say, I'm not going to do it my way. I'm not going to follow my logic. I'm going to follow you, and I'm going to trust you, Jesus. Matthew did. Left his job, completely revolutionized his whole life. God will do for you what he's done for everyone else if you choose Jesus and you choose to follow him and trust him. It's worth it all. Jesus, you came to take away our sin, but you also came to give us the fullness of life. For those that need to take that first step and trust you for their salvation, help them to do that. For those of us who've needed to trust you in those hard areas, help us to turn them over to you and follow you and see what you will do. Because following Jesus is better. In Jesus' name, amen.